Warning: this case does involve elements of violence and sexual assault on a child. If this topic makes you feel uncomfortable, I completely understand, and there will be a new case coming your way next week. 24 years ago today, a parent's worst nightmare came true. But it's definitely speculated if the parents of deceased 6-year-old JonBenet Ramsey actually felt this way. When Patsy Ramsey woke up, she said she found a ransom note as she was descending the stairs in their Boulder, Colorado home. She screams, realizing her daughter is gone. John Ramsey, the father, comes downstairs, wondering what happened. They immediately search JonBenet's room, but she is not in her bed. They also check on Burke, their 9-year-old son, who is still asleep, according to Patsy. Immediately, she calls the police at 5:52 a.m., and right from the start, things are not adding up.
911 emergency.
Police.
What's going on?
515th Street.
What's going on there, ma'am?
We have a kidnapping. Hi, please.
Explain to me what's going on, okay?
There's a note left and our daughter's gone.
A note was left and your daughter is gone? How old is your daughter?
6 years old. She's gone. 6 years old.
How long ago was it?
I don't know. I just found the note. And my daughter's gone.
Does it say who took her?
What?
Does it say who took her?
I don't know. There's a ransom note here.
It's a ransom note?
It says SBTC. Victory. Please.
Okay, what's your name? Are you
Patsy Ramsey, I'm the mother. Oh my God. Please.
I'm sending an officer over, okay?
Please.
Do you know how long she's been gone?
No, I don't. Please, we just got out. Is she right here? Oh my God, please.
Okay, well,
There's somebody.
I am, honey.
Please.
Take a deep breath,
Please,
okay?
hurry.
Patsy.
The 911 operator tried to keep Patsy on the phone before she hung up, but not without a conversation that has been debated in the public and law enforcement for years. In a CBS documentary called The Case of JonBenet Ramsey, they enhanced this audio. They claim it appears that John Ramsey is saying, quote, "We're not speaking to you," unquote, as if he was talking to a child. The child, assumed to be Burke Ramsey, also seems to ask, quote, "What did you find?"
Patsy.
Police arrive 8 minutes later at 6 a.m., but the first thing they notice is the ransom note, a 3-page long ransom note. So here it is, and I'm sorry, but like I said, it's long. Quote, "Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. We do respect your business, but not the country that it serves. At this time, we have your daughter in our possession. She is safe and unharmed, and if you want to see her see 1997, you must follow our instructions to the letter. You will withdraw $118,000 from your account. $100,000 will be in $100 bills, and the remaining $18,000 in $20 bills. Make sure that you bring an adequate-sized attaché to the bank. When you get home, you will put the money in a brown paper bag. I will call you between 8 and 10 a.m. tomorrow to instruct you on delivery. The delivery will be exhausting, so I advise you to be rested. If we monitor you getting the money early, we might call you early to arrange an earlier delivery of the money and hence an earlier delivery pickup of your daughter. Any deviation of my instructions will result in the immediate execution of your daughter. You will also be denied her remains for proper burial. The 2 gentlemen watching over your daughter do not particularly like you, so I advise you not to provoke them. Speaking to anyone about your situation, such as police, FBI, etc., will result in your daughter being beheaded. If we catch you talking to a stray dog, she dies. If you alert bank authorities, she dies. If the money is in any way marked or tampered with, she dies. You will be scanned for electronic devices, and if any are found, she dies. You can try to deceive us, but be warned that we are familiar with law enforcement countermeasures and tactics. You stand a 99% chance of killing your daughter if you try to outsmart us. Follow our instructions and you stand a 100% chance of getting her back. You and your family are under constant scrutiny as well as the authorities. Don't try to grow a brain, John. You are not the only fat cat around, so don't think that killing will be difficult. Don't underestimate us, John. Use that good Southern common sense of yours. It is up to you now, John. Victory, SBTC. Unquote. So the first thing detectives note is obviously the length of this ransom note or letter. One of the officers actually says this made the entire scene appear staged. The team in the CBS documentary actually timed how long it would take to just copy the letter, and it was over 21 minutes. This wasn't even the amount of time it would have taken to think about what you were going to write and the thought process, which obviously would have taken longer than just 21 minutes. And even stranger, they found 2 practice notes based on ink imprints in the notepad. And if you know this case, you know this notepad actually belonged to Patsy Ramsay, and it was placed neatly back in her desk. Whoever wrote the note had to go into Patsy's office, take the notepad out of her desk, write 2 practice notes, then do the real thing, and place it back where it was found. So let's get into the details of the ransom note itself. Why $118,000? Well, again, if you know anything about this case, you would know that was the exact amount of John Ramsay's bonus that he was going to receive that year. The Ramsays were millionaires, so why wouldn't they ask for $500,000 or even $1 million? Why such a specific number? There were also multiple spelling errors in the first paragraph that mysteriously disappeared as the note continued, making it seem like the writer tried to appear either less intelligent or English was not their first language. But there is some pretty immaculate vocabulary in this letter, such as attaché, you can try to deceive us, but be warned that we are familiar with law enforcement countermeasures and tactics, and any deviation of my instructions. These are some pretty large words. Patsy Ramsay actually had a degree in journalism, so she very well could have produced such an immaculate note. A handwriting expert compared this note and Patsy's handwriting and found over 200 similarities between the two, coming to the conclusion that it was very possible Patsy wrote this note. Now, it cannot be concluded that she did write it, they were just saying that it's possible. Another odd point of this ransom note was the instruction, do not contact law enforcement. And what is the first thing Patsy does? Call 911 and even her friends. Yes, Patsy Ramsay called her friends immediately after getting off the phone with 911, telling them to come to the house. In my opinion, wouldn't you be more concerned about finding JonBenet and speaking with law enforcement than talking with your friends? I don't know. The kidnappers also told the Ramsays that they would call between 8 and 10 a.m., but no one ever called, and it appeared no one was concerned between this time period. I mean, if your daughter was kidnapped and the kidnapper told you they would call by 10 and they haven't, wouldn't you start to panic? But from what I've seen, no one in the house makes note of it, and police even call their calm behavior during this time period suspicious. Police had already done a quick search of the house to check for any clues as to where JonBenet could have gone or who took her, but they didn't find anything. At this point, Burke seems to have woken up after the police shined a light in his room in search of any clues. At one point, John disappeared out of anyone's sight for an hour and a half, although he claims he went to his study. No one knows what he was doing, but officers at the scene have said when he came back, he appeared agitated. After John's strange disappearance, detectives decided to keep a closer eye on John because they didn't want him leaving for a long period of time again. Police were very skeptical of the family at first, but the way they went about it was all wrong, in my opinion. We'll get into that soon. Around 1 p.m., Detective Linda Arndt told John that they were going to search the house from top to bottom, starting upstairs. Instead of going upstairs with officers, John and his friend, Fleet White, go into the basement. Within minutes, John screams, "My baby," as he carries JonBenet's body up the stairs and sets her on the floor near the front door. Again, another big mistake. The front door is a high-trafficked area where I'm sure many guests have come and gone plenty of times, leaving DNA evidence behind. Detective Linda Arndt told ABC's 2020 that when she told John to set JonBenet down, that they exchanged quote-unquote nonverbal contact. She says in that moment, she knew the killer was in the house. She tells ABC she started counting the unused bullets in her gun, feeling as though no one was going to leave alive that day. Detectives enter the basement and find an open and broken window. A piece of duct tape and a garrote were also found in a separate room in the basement where JonBenet was found. The garrote, a tool used to choke someone, was a piece of rope and a broken paintbrush. Basically, the paintbrush would act as a handle so the person who was doing the choking can hold onto it while the rope stops the airway in the throat. John admits that he previously broke the window because he forgot his keys one day and had to get in the house through the window. He also admits to removing the piece of duct tape from JonBenet's mouth, as well as removing the garrote from her wrists. So not only did John contaminate the scene, but it was absolutely contaminated from the beginning. There were many people in the house throughout the day, walking throughout the house, because based on the ransom note, who would have thought a murder happened here? But either way, Boulder police should not have allowed outsiders to come into the house and continue to contaminate the scene of an abduction. They should have continued to take evidence and test for DNA without having to worry about testing other people who could have contaminated the scene. Fleet White, the friend that John went down into the basement with, allegedly made a statement that John had actually said that he found JonBenet before he even turned the light on. Allegedly, he said that it was way too dark to see anything, so he questioned how John knew where JonBenet was. Only 30 minutes after discovering JonBenet's body, John actually called his pilot because the family had 2 planes, y'all. 2. Anyway, he called his pilot to get the plane ready to go to their hometown in Atlanta, Georgia. Cops find out that John is planning on leaving, and they tell him this is an open investigation, and he can't leave the state, although they did want the family to leave the scene so they could continue investigating. John, Patsy, and Burke ended up staying with friends, while police and crime scene analysts continued to investigate the home. The autopsy of JonBenet was done by Boulder County Coroner John Meyer. Although he could not pinpoint the time of death, he noted her cause of death to be asphyxia by strangulation associated with cranial cerebral trauma. In short, she had been physically suffocated, and she had also been hit on the right side of her head. Now, it seemed that the garrote was what strangled JonBenet, but what hit her on the head? Well, renowned forensic pathologist Warner Spitz actually reviewed the autopsy to make it easier for people like you and I to understand. There were 2 very important items that were found on the Ramsay's kitchen counter, but let's get into the first one. A very large and heavy flashlight was found on the kitchen counter that no one has claimed to this day. Police actually fingerprinted this flashlight, and no prints came back on the flashlight or the batteries. Well, it got on the kitchen counter somehow, and the batteries had to get in the flashlight somehow. So why were there no prints at all? When Spitz took a prototype of this flashlight and matched it to the indentation in JonBenet's skull, he found an exact match. He also says that this hit to the head was more than likely not the cause of her physical death. It would have made her brain dead, but her blood still would have been circulating, causing her heart to beat. The strangulation is what ended JonBenet's physical life. Former Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner actually didn't ask me anything on Reddit about JonBenet's case. The post has now been taken down, but many news outlets have posted screenshots and reports on this thread. Beckner claims that, quote, "We know from evidence she was hit in the head very hard with an unknown object, possibly a flashlight or similar item. The blow knocked her into unconsciousness, which could have led someone to believe she was dead. The strangulation came 45 minutes to 2 hours after the head strike based on the swelling on the brain. While the head wound would have eventually killed her, the strangulation actually did kill her. The rest of the scene we believed was staged to make it look like a kidnapping or assault gone bad." Another significant piece in the autopsy was the finding of a piece of pineapple in the small intestine, showing that it had been digesting for 2 to 4 hours at the time of her death. Okay, so what? Well, Patsy told police that on Christmas evening, they went to a friend's house for a Christmas party. They left the party around 8:45, arrived home by 9:30, and JonBenet was asleep in the car, so John brought her to bed. She also says that she did not see JonBenet eat any pineapple, her favorite snack. But who did have pineapple that night? Either Patsy or Burke, but I believe it was Burke. There were 2 sets of fingerprints found on the bowl that the pineapple was in, Patsy's and Burke's. But when Patsy was asked about the bowl, she said that she would not have prepared it because the spoon was too large. There was also a cup of tea nearby the bowl that had Burke's fingerprints on it. I believe Patsy's prints were on the bowl because she was the one who put the bowl away previously, and Burke prepared the pineapple and tea. But again, JonBenet also clearly ate pineapple. What I find odd is how much pineapple was eaten, or I guess I should say how little. The bowl was practically full. Many people believe that Burke was eating pineapple during the night and JonBenet came down for a midnight snack. Maybe she saw Burke eating her favorite snack, grabbed a piece with her fingers, and Burke hit her in the head with the flashlight nearby, leaving her brain dead. But why would Burke do this? Well, Burke had actually struck JonBenet before with a golf club. A friend of the Ramsays tells reporters that Patsy told her that Burke and JonBenet were playing outside one day, and Burke lost his temper and hit JonBenet with a golf club near her eye, leaving a scar in August of 1994. Crime scene analysts also looked at JonBenet's room and they found feces on Christmas candy. Clearly a very immature, disgusting prank. What I'm very, very curious about is what Christmas morning was like between the siblings. Did JonBenet receive bigger or better gifts than Burke, and he finally had enough? Burke was the older brother, and when JonBenet was born, there was obviously less focus on him. John was also working longer hours, so maybe Burke thought that JonBenet was the cause for their father's absence. 2 weeks after the murder, Burke was interviewed. Once again, this was another strange part of this case. The police actually had not interviewed John and Patsy because they were in no condition to be interviewed, but they were going to allow their son to go first. John and Patsy would not do an individual interview until 120 days after the murder. This is so untypical of any homicide investigation. Anyone involved in the victim's life is almost always separated and interviewed within 24 to 36 hours. But the FBI was told by local police to treat the Ramsays like victims, not suspects. They got the hint that this was a wealthy family who had influence in Boulder, so they complied. Like, what the hell? A 6-year-old girl has been killed, and you're willing to let potential killers off the hook because of their influence in a community? It makes no sense to me, but okay. Let's go back to Burke's interview. The Ramsays agreed to have Burke interviewed, but it could not have been done by a police officer. It had to be done with a social worker who had experience with children. Surprisingly, Burke was very playful and happy throughout the interview. When he was asked if he had any secrets, he told the social worker, quote, "I probably do, but I don't remember any of them. But if I did remember, I don't think I'd tell you," unquote. Okay, so odd statement number 1. Let's continue. He also told his theory to the social worker, saying, quote, "I think someone took her very quietly, tiptoed down the basement, and then maybe took a knife out," unquote. And then he does this stabbing motion, and he continues, quote, "Or maybe a hammer hit her in the head, maybe," unquote. And then he does the same motion, as if he's striking someone, or he has like an object in his hand, and he's like hammering it down. This was odd to me because JonBenet was actually hit in the head. Did he know more, but was told not to give too much away? Even if Burke did kill his sister, he could not be legally prosecuted because he was 9 years old at the time of the crime. In the state of Colorado, you cannot prosecute anyone less than 10 years old. If the murder happened a month later than it did, Burke could have potentially been found responsible in the court of law. Crazy, right? But again, this was a very wealthy, prominent family. Their name would have been tainted if people found out that their son was a killer. Burke was interviewed again in June of 1998, and he told the detective that he, quote, "heard his mom going psycho," unquote, but stayed in bed. When he was asked what he thought was happening, he said, quote, "Maybe JonBenet went missing, but that's not likely. What are the chances of that happening?" Unquote. Okay, so let's go back a little to January 1st, 1997. Patsy and John Ramsay do their infamous interview with CNN, their first time speaking publicly about their daughter's death. The first thing that is said comes from John saying, quote, "For those of you who want to ask, I'm going to answer very directly. I did not kill my daughter, JonBenet," unquote. Truthfully, the two biggest suspects at the time were John and Patsy Ramsay. Burke wasn't too involved in the theories just yet. So we're going to talk a little bit about body language here, and pretty obvious disclaimer, I'm no body language expert, so keep that in mind. As John is stating that he did not kill his daughter, his head is nodding, seeming to be a truthful statement in my opinion. But then, when they were asked if they believed an intruder came into their home and killed JonBenet, both John and Patsy shook their heads no, while simultaneously, John said yes. Patsy is also shaking her head no until she hears John say yes, and then she starts to shake her head yes. It's very subtle, but one of the body language experts in the CBS documentary pointed it out, and now every time I watch that interview, it's just so obvious to me. Although Patsy and John gave permission to themselves to go on the air, they told friends not to talk to the press. One friend, Judith Phillips, who did not take this advice, only to spread the word, not bash the Ramsays, was cut off socially. I just find that weird. If you are willing to allow friends to come into the home the day your daughter was allegedly kidnapped. Why wouldn't you be okay with friends spreading awareness to help find her killer? When Boulder police finally interviewed the Ramsays on April 30th, 1997, both Patsy and John were asked if they were willing to take polygraphs. John stated, quote, "I would be insulted if you asked me to take a polygraph test, frankly. I mean, if you haven't talked to enough people who's telling you what kind of people we are not the kind of people you're making us out to be," unquote. But Patsy says that she would take the polygraph, and when she was asked if she passed, she says, quote, "Yes, I would pass it. I'll take 10 of them. I don't care, you know. Do whatever you want," unquote. In March of 1997, Boulder Police Department hired a retired Colorado Springs homicide detective, Lou Smith, who really established the intruder theory. The Ramsays had not set their alarm system, and detectives found 2 doors open, along with the open window in the basement, so Lou Smith claimed it would have been very easy for the assailant to enter the house. The Ramsays were gone that night for a Christmas party, and many believe that's when the attacker or attackers entered the home. Lou found that the most likely entry point was the basement window because it faced an alleyway along the Ramsays' property. There was also a suitcase nearby this window that the Ramsays claimed to have no idea where it came from, appearing to be a possible object for the intruder to help prop themselves up to leave through the window. There were also clothing fibers from JonBenet's clothing found inside of the suitcase, leading investigators to believe the intruder had plans to place JonBenet inside of the suitcase. He also proved that it was possible for a grown man to go through the window in the basement, which I'll admit I was skeptical of this until I saw Lou Smith physically go through that window. But crime scene photos actually show a pretty large cobweb in the corner of the window where the intruder's body would have to go over based on the hinges. If the intruder did enter through the window, the cobweb would have been disturbed. Now, I've seen some people say that spiders make webs very quickly, which they do, but I actually looked up spider activity in the winter, which, side note, I never thought I would have to do while researching a true crime case, but here we are. Spiders really are not active in the cold temperatures because they use their leftover energy that would have been used to make a cobweb to produce heat. For a spider to make the kind of web that was in the window, it would have taken a lot of energy. Lou also noted the marks on JonBenet's back appear to have been from a stun gun that was used to subdue JonBenet. The Ramsays did not own a stun gun, so this supported the intruder theory. But CBS made a really good point that if JonBenet had been tased, 1, she would have screamed, and 2, stun guns make you more alert and produce adrenaline. It doesn't subdue you. In addition, they also found the toy train tracks in the basement were a perfect match of the scars on JonBenet's back. They theorized that someone, more than likely a child, used this toy train track to poke JonBenet to see if she would respond. But let's continue with the intruder theory, because I'm not saying it's not impossible. The statistics are just unlikely. Now, I hate to say this because I know JonBenet was more than just a pretty girl. I'm sure she was smart, playful, funny, and more than just a beautiful blonde pageant contestant. But if we're going to discuss why an assailant could have entered the house to take JonBenet, we have to discuss this part of her life. There were over 1,600 persons of interest at the time of this case, including sex offenders and felons in the area, those who worked for the Ramsays, and those who knew the Ramsays personally. JonBenet did appear to have been sexually assaulted based on reports of swelling and discoloration in her autopsy. As DNA analysis continued to develop, there was also foreign DNA found on or in JonBenet's underwear, as well as under her fingernails, coming from the same unidentified DNA profile. The first suspects in this case included a neighbor, Bill McReynolds, who played Santa Claus for the Ramsays in 1995 and 1996. We all know most of those Santa Claus people are just weird. At least, that's my opinion. JonBenet gave him a vial of gold glitter each year, and he tells the press, quote, "The stardust was all I took with me for good luck when I had heart surgery. Her murder was hard on me than my operation. She made a profound change in me. I felt very close to that little girl. I don't really have other children that I have the special relationship with, not even my own children or my own grandchildren. When I die, I'm going to be cremated. I've asked my wife to mix the stardust JonBenet gave me with my ashes," unquote. I know that this statement was really sweet, and I don't think he ever did anything to JonBenet, but it is a little weird to say that you had a special relationship that was closer than your own children. Anyway, Bill has been cleared as a suspect based on DNA, and he died in 2002. The next suspect was a man named Gary Oliva. Gary is a registered sex offender in the Boulder area. He was arrested in 2000 for unrelated charges when police found a magazine cutout of JonBenet as well as a stun gun. As soon as that was found, he became an immediate suspect, especially considering his past sexual charges. His longtime friend even came forward to the police and said that Gary told him that he hurt a little girl not long after the murder. He also said that Gary once strangled his mother with a telephone cord, and he wrapped this telephone cord in a very similar way as the garrote that was found on JonBenet's neck. Although he was also cleared from DNA results years later, Gary was arrested in 2016 for 2 counts of child sexual exploitation and possessing child pornography. Bill and Gary were not the only high-profile suspects, but also a junkyard mechanic who worked nearby the Ramsays named Michael Helgoth. 2 days after the DA, Alex Hunter, released a press conference saying that they were zeroing in on a new suspect. Michael committed suicide. This suicide is also debated if it was actually a homicide on internet forums. Michael was found shot in the chest with a pillow over his wound, acting as a silencer, leading people to believe Michael was actually murdered. But a friend of Michael's spoke to reporters that Michael had actually killed himself based on a failed relationship. He killed himself on Valentine's Day, triggering him to act. When they searched his house, they actually found a pair of high-tech boots that matched a partial boot print outside of the Ramsays' home. Police ruled out the boot as a match based on the shoe size, but John Ramsay claims the police were too quick to rule this. It is said in some reports that Michael has been cleared, but there's actually more to the theory that Michael Helgoth killed JonBenet that A&E brought forth in a documentary called Hunting JonBenet's Killer, The Untold Story. They spoke with Michael's former friend and coworker, John Kennedy, who believes Michael was involved in JonBenet's murder. He says Michael told him that he wanted to know what it was like to crack a human skull, that he and a friend were going to make $50,000 to $60,000 each, and he lost his flashlight after the murder. Michael also changed his haircut after the murder, cutting it from a long style to a buzz cut. But there's also many theorists who believe John Kennedy was actually involved in the crime because of his involvement with documentary productions to point the finger at others, maybe in an attempt to clear his own name. Allegedly, he does have a sexual crime based on a consensual relationship with a teenager, but he also broke into Michael's home in 2000 after his death, quote, to preserve evidence, unquote. According to the JonBenet Case Encyclopedia, John Kennedy is not only pointing the finger at Michael, but also another man named John Gigax, claiming they were both working together. But Gigax claims that Kennedy knew that he moved from Boulder to Indiana months before JonBenet's death, saying, quote, "The people pointing the finger at me and saying I'm a bad, scary guy were both aware that I'd moved, unquote. Police found that Gighax was in Indiana at the time of the murder, and he has been cleared as a suspect. About a year and a half into the case, in June of 1998, Boulder police, the FBI, and the district attorney Alex Hunter decided to meet. The case was going nowhere due to Alex Hunter's push against search warrants on the Ramsays. Detective Steve Thomas of the Boulder Police recalls working this case and being very frustrated with the DA's office. He tried to get a search warrant for cell phone records and credit card records, another very standard procedure for any homicide investigation. But he says Alex Hunter did not approve of these search warrants. The Ramsays were also given copies of police records, including the transcript of their first interview at their home on December 26th, prior to their first formal interview with Detective Thomas, which is, again, not standard procedure. Many theorize the Ramsays wanted these transcripts to study before their interviews to get their story straight. It is unclear as to who was giving these records to the Ramsays, but to me, it appeared it may have been Alex Hunter. Law enforcement officially decided to demand that Alex Hunter host a grand jury for witnesses to testify under oath that could help them lead the case somewhere. Although unwillingly, Hunter eventually complied. In October of 1999, a grand jury was called for Alex Hunter to present the case and have witnesses testify. And even though jurors agreed to indict John and Patsy Ramsey for 2 counts of neglect that put JonBenet in harm's way and hindering evidence, the DA told the public that there was no reason or evidence to go to trial. So in my opinion, someone was clearly pulling the strings somewhere. How do you have 12 jurors advise a trial to happen and you just decide, yeah, no, I don't feel like it? In June of 2006, Patsy Ramsey died from stage 4 ovarian cancer, but a month later, an arrest was finally made. John Mark Carr was arrested for the murder of JonBenet Ramsey in Thailand. He confessed that he drugged, sexually assaulted, and accidentally killed JonBenet. But he only gave minimal details that were clearly very public details. It was proved to be a false confession after 18 hours of investigation. Detectives were able to prove John Mark Carr was not even in Colorado at the time of the murder. Personally, I believe this was done because of the recent death of Patsy Ramsey, and more attention was shined on the case at this time. Okay, I'm giving you a warning. This next part will be controversial and also graphic. Law enforcement revealed that JonBenet had been sexually assaulted due to finding blood and DNA evidence on her underwear that matched the DNA under her fingernails. CBS's documentary actually showed forensic scientist Dr. Henry Lee doing DNA analysis on an unopened package of child's underwear. I know it's weird, but wait. When the results came back, it was found that there were 2 areas of foreign DNA on the underwear that did not match to anyone in the lab. Most likely, this DNA came from the manufacturer. Dr. Lee also says that the blood found in JonBenet's underwear was only a small spot. It did not indicate sexual assault. I don't agree with this statement based on what else was found that wasn't really brought up in this documentary. I've seen many reports that JonBenet was penetrated with the wooden paintbrush from the garrote. The autopsy does say befringement of foreign material inside the vagina, but it doesn't say what that foreign material is. I've seen some reports stating that it was a conversation between the detectives and the coroner used a microscope to come to the conclusion that this foreign material was a piece of wood. Many suggest that the wood came from the broken paintbrush that had been used to make the garrote. It was suggested that a splinter of wood might have stuck to the perpetrator's finger before he or she penetrated JonBenet. It could have also broken off the end of the paintbrush if the stick rather than a finger was used to penetrate her. Many people believe John was allegedly sexually assaulting his daughter. He went into a rage when he brought her upstairs and killed her. Although there's no report of long-term sexual abuse in JonBenet's autopsy or past medical reports, there's many arguments for and against this theory. This theory was formed primarily because her autopsy reports chronic inflammation in the genital area. But this could have been caused by poor hygiene, especially if JonBenet would wet the bed and herself and sleep through the night like this as frequently as she did. According to the author of Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, quote, "The FBI believed that JonBenet's vaginal trauma was not consistent with a history of sexual abuse, and they had turned up no evidence of any other type of abuse. The sexual violation of JonBenet, whether pre- or post-mortem, did not appear to have been committed for the perpetrator's gratification. The penetration, which caused minor genital trauma, was more likely part of a staged crime scene intended to mislead the police," unquote. Hey guys, this is hard to read and to say. I mean, I've written a script and it was hard, but reading this out loud it's awful. But here we go. One of the lead investigators also wrote a book on this investigation called JonBenet Inside the Ramsay Murder Investigation. In this book, it says, quote, "In mid-September, a panel of pediatric experts from around the country reached one of the major conclusions of this investigation, that JonBenet had suffered vaginal trauma prior to the day she was killed. There were no dissenting opinions among them on the issue, and they firmly rejected any possibility that the trauma to the hymen and chronic vaginal inflammation were caused by urination issues or masturbation. We gathered affidavits stating in clear language that there were injuries consistent with prior trauma and sexual abuse. There was chronic abuse, past violation of the vagina, evidence of both acute and injury and chronic sexual abuse. In other words, the doctors were saying it had happened before," unquote. In short, many medical professionals believed JonBenet was molested via penetration with objects or other body parts like a finger. So there's definitely some arguments from medical and law enforcement professionals on whether or not JonBenet was previously sexually assaulted before her murder, but to this day, it cannot be proven that it did or did not happen. Patsy Ramsay also faced many allegations claiming that she killed her daughter. Many theorized JonBenet had one of her frequent bedwetting incidents and Patsy snapped. Many believe Patsy hit JonBenet's head against an object like the bedpost or a side table. Her paintbrush was also used as part of the garrote, which people claim supports this theory, as well as the similarities found between her handwriting and the handwriting in the Ransom Note. Although I know bedwetting is common for children under 7, as a child is still learning to control their bladder, I wonder if the high frequency was caused by something else. Other causes of bedwetting include stress or sexual assault. Again, I cannot say definitively that JonBenet was being sexually assaulted, but I do believe she had a stressful home life. The feces found in her room on her candy and presents definitely shows conflict between her and her brother, in my opinion. Investigators reported finding a pair of pants too large for JonBenet and had fecal matter still in them. Patsy had already been diagnosed with cancer that I believed created hardship in the family's life. A former housekeeper recalls the first time anyone noticed smeared feces was right after Patsy's diagnosis, allegedly caused by Burke. That woman deserves a raise, that's all I'll say. Burke recently did his infamous interview with Dr. Phil in an attempt to clear his name, but it really did anything but that. He was smiling as he was talking about his sister's death, which spiked more attention to his possible guilt, although Dr. Phil reports that it was a nervous smile. Dr. Phil got a lot of heat for not giving Burke hard questions, even defending him after the episode aired. But the Ramsays and Dr. Phil actually had the same lawyer for defamation lawsuits, so interpret that however you want. Burke actually sued CBS, calling the accusations made against him in their documentary as defamatory. Eventually, the lawsuit was dismissed after Burke settled for $750 million from CBS. In 2008, the newly elected Boulder DA, Mary Lucy, made a public apology to the Ramsays, saying that this foreign DNA excluded them, therefore they could not have committed the murder. But the current DA, Stanley Garnett, questions Lacey's decision to do this, and he's not the only one. He says, quote, "Our job is not to issue random exonerations of people in cases, and it's very confusing when that happens. We all shed DNA all the time with our skin cells. It can be deposited anywhere at any time for various reasons that are benign. To clear someone just on the premise of touch DNA, especially when you have a situation where the crime scene wasn't secure at the beginning, really is a stretch," unquote. Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner also disagreed with clearing the Ramsays, saying, quote, "Exonerating anyone based on a small piece of evidence that has not been proven to even be connected to the crime is absurd," unquote. It's pretty debated if this case will be solved with DNA or not. The Ramsays' attorney and many others believe that this is a DNA case, while others believe that's not true. Especially if you believe one of the Ramsays killed JonBenet, DNA evidence could not implicate them because obviously their DNA was all over the house. So that's it for this case. JonBenet would and should be 30 years old today, probably living a beautiful life. But let me know what you think. Do you think Burke got mad over a piece of pineapple, or do you think an intruder came in the house attempting to kidnap JonBenet, leave this long ransom note, and then accidentally killed her? Or do you think one of the parents did it? Personally, I and many others believe this case will never be solved, and that's all I'm going to say for my own personal theory. I know I love to talk theories, but I am way too scared of getting sued on this case, okay? This family, they still got a lot of money. That never went away. But let me know what you all think. Do you believe DNA can really solve this case, or do you believe someone in the house did this? Thanks for listening to Let's Talk Crime, and I'll see you next time.